Our second session today is a panel. We've called it Mourning Matthew, the Shock and the Challenges. The days and weeks following Matthew Shepard's gruesome treatment and death were difficult for the University of Wyoming and for the Laramie community. Students were upset, most shocked by the murder of one of their own, and many worried for their own safety. Townspeople and faculty felt betrayed, wondering how somebody from their community could have carried out such a crime. Several rites of mourning took place, both the university and St. Paul's Newman Center holding vigils and memorials. And then there was the press and other outsiders who descended on Laramie, many, perhaps most, seeking to portray the crime according to their own predetermined perspectives. They showed little interest in understanding the deed in its own context, but rather took a few bare facts and plugged them into their already set beliefs. Our first panel, our second session, brings together four young people, or should I say people who were young in 1988. I'm sorry. Sorry. They played key roles in some of the events of that time and in the community responses to what was happening. So Jim Osborn, Nicole Bondurant, Cathy Renna, and Rob Spaulding. The panel will be moderated by now Father Rob Spaulding, and I will let him do further introductions. Father Rob.
Thank you very much. It is a privilege to be here this morning, but I have to begin by acknowledging it's also a little scary for me. It's a privilege to be here because I was here in 1998. The life, death, and surrounding events of Matthew Shepard have changed my life profoundly. When people ask my story and the journey of my life, especially into leadership in the Catholic Church, it's not often that I can tell that without involving Matthew, without involving the events. But it's also frightening for me because even though I can say that I've gone through a profound personal transformation of heart, I know that I represent an institution that oftentimes does not reflect that transformation, that oftentimes continues to cause pain for far too many people. And so if anyone here has been harmed or hurt by the Catholic Church, I want to personally apologize to you. We can forget our fundamental principles, which is that every human being is created in the image and likeness of God. And if you start from that place, you're pretty sure you're going to end up in a good place. But once we forget that fundamental truth, there seems to be no way to return. So thank you for trusting me to have this privileged position of moderating this conversation, of introducing this incredible panel. I'm sure we'll all be sharing more about our own lives as this goes on. Sitting next to me is Jim Osborn, who was a fellow student with me here at the University of Wyoming. Grew up not too far from me. I was raised in Gillette, Wyoming. He was just down the street in Wright, Wyoming. Now, that will influence some of our conversation because that area of growing up certainly shapes attitudes. And I think Sheriff O'Malley certainly reflected what I would say almost verbatim about the culture in which I was raised and the profound transformation that was needed in my own life that I'm incredibly grateful for. Jim currently works at the University of Wyoming. I think you're the chair of the Title IX, the director of the Title IX department. His comments were that he was privileged and pleased to have known Matt as a friend. But the problem was it was for far too short. He's played an angel on television, and will tell you whether that's actually true in his own life here as this conversation continues. But it's a pleasure for me to be able to call Jim a friend and a colleague. To Jim's left is Nicole Bondurant. Nicole is a teacher here in the Laramie community. She's taught English and been a club sponsor at such clubs as Sally, which is our GSA-type club, Peace Jam, and Sources of Strength for 17 years. In 1998, Nicole had just moved to Laramie to get her second degree in order to become a teacher. Matt Shepard's murder inspired her to become more of an activist and to become the type of teacher who focuses every day on building acceptance and celebration for all students so that they can find their own power, voice, and diverse perspectives. The panel is diverse, including not just local Wyoming residents, but in helping us to understand the way that Matthew has affected not only the United States, but really the whole world. Cathy Renna has agreed to be with us. She's the principal of Target Q, a public relations and communications firm that focuses on LGBT and HIV-related issues and events and provides media training, strategic and crisis communication services to diverse nonprofit organizations. Cathy is nationally recognized as a media relations and communications expert and leader within the LGBTQ community. She has played a critical role in media related to many issues affecting the community, from marriage equality and the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, to helping create visibility for older LGBTQ people, homeless LGBTQ youth, transgender youth, and a host of other issues. In the 1990s through 2003, she was a major force behind the success and growth of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, or GLAAD. Cathy served as a primary spokesperson for GLAAD, with her final position as its first national news media director. In her role as communications director at GLAAD, Cathy played a central role in shaping media coverage of the beating death of Matthew Shepard in 1998. And beyond, working on the ground with local activists and students on the tragedy that became a cultural marker for a shift in media visibility of LGBTQ issues. She arrived in Laramie shortly after Matt was found and has returned numerous times. In 1999, for the hearings and trials of the perpetrators and other related events, her work continues to this day, and she is a source of resource to media at the national and local levels on a host of issues, including hate violence. She has recently worked with the Anti-Violence Project and Matthew Shepard Foundation. Her TEDx talk about Matthew Shepard, why his death received the attention it did, and the impact of his murder had on future coverage of hate violence can be found on YouTube and has been viewed thousands of times. So please join me in welcoming this panel this morning. Many of you who have seen the Laramie Project or are here in the Laramie community remember the great bonding that took place among so many people who felt their hearts moved by this tragic event. I'm not the person who should be here with you this morning. Father Roger Schmidt was the pastor at St. Paul's Newman Center at the time. He's unable to be with us, but I asked him, what would you like to share this morning? And as a man of few and profound words, he responded simply, I am much more attentive to the prejudice that continues to exist toward our gay brothers and sisters. Matthew's death continues to affect the way I think and the way I talk. I don't think there's a better synopsis or summation for the reason of all of us gathering here this morning. For many of us in this room, Matthew is a name or a symbol, and I was reminded just as we began that one of the opportunities we have by being people who are present is to move beyond a symbol or an icon and to remember the person, to remember Matthew, to gather as people here at university who want to study, to have our hearts and minds opened. My religious tradition believes that remembering is more than just an intellectual activity, but it's the opportunity to make present again a person. We come this morning to make present again our brother Matthew as we share our own stories. And so I wonder if a first question as we begin might be simply to walk us through what you were doing during that October time and how those first couple of weeks and months of experience have shaped your life to today.
October of 1998 is something of a blur because everything was happening very quickly and in front of cameras. I remember, I remember very vividly when I found out that Matt had been attacked. I'd gotten an email from Tina Labrie, who had introduced me to Matt because he wanted to become a part of the student group. I remember when the moment that I realized that Chastity was involved, because Chastity Paisley had worked in the Campus Activities Center as a student there and had been excited about the upcoming Gay Awareness Week activities, had helped us in our preparations and filling out the paperwork, and greeted me with a smile when I'd come in to work on posters or things. I remember coming in and hearing that last night we got messages from Good Morning America and Dateline NBC, and the cameras will be here at about 10 o'clock this morning, and they would really like a chance to speak with someone from the LGBTA. And we think that's probably going to have to be you. And I said, crap, I better go home and shave and put on better clothes. I remember calling and talking to Commander Dave O'Malley, who I thought had the most stereotypical Irish cop name I had ever heard. and having him tell me the extent of Matt's injuries. What I remember most is walking around thinking how much I was going to miss that smile. Because Matt didn't just smile with his eyes or his mouth. His whole damn body lit up, and he'd twinkle at you somehow. And I remember the first time I talked to Cathy Renna, when she called to say, hey, I'm here in Washington, how can we help? And I was literally underneath a desk in the Campus Activities Center because I was trying to dodge a couple of the reporters for 10 minutes to return some phone calls, and I said, get on a plane. And I met her, I think, the next day.
Yes.
Because she did.
I did.
So that's kind of what I remember about October, was just being on autopilot and feeling this incredible numbness. But I also remember that the United Multicultural Council didn't blink. They went into their meeting and came out with the yellow armband idea. I remember them making those armbands late into the night and seeing them drying on strings in the backs of chairs and desks and every surface they could find to let that paint dry so that they could hand out armbands because they'd run out of the first batch. I remember seeing signs at the University Inn and Arby's saying hate is not a Laramie value, and people writing on their bed sheets and hanging them out of windows on their apartment down on 3rd Street above the 3rd Street Bar and Grill. I remember seeing armbands everywhere, and I remember everybody coming together. I remember getting the phone call that confused me. After dealing with all the media, I remember hearing, we have a message from Father Roger, and he would like to talk to you about maybe them hosting a candlelight vigil for Matt. And I said, why in gay hell would I want to talk to a Catholic priest right now? And I remember that after 2 minutes on the phone with him, I couldn't imagine not being a part of the event because of the way he spoke about bringing our community together and sending a message of love and peace. And wouldn't it be cool if that came from the Catholic Church in Laramie, Wyoming? And I remember, not in October, but not long after, a group of ragtag individuals who put on halos and bed sheets with PVC pipe underneath, and pretending we were a lot more angelic than I really should have credit for. That's kind of what I remember about October was a blur, and yet so many of those details are burned into my brain. Because they have changed my life in ways I never could have imagined.
Is this turned on? Yeah, okay. So I had a quieter moving into this. Jim was, the person who had to be in the middle of all of the media, and I never knew I ever would. Whenever I was making these choices, it still kind of floors me to this day. I just moved to Laramie from Casper. I'm originally from East Texas, and I've lived in lots of warm climates before coming to Wyoming, and had been here a few years. I had a little daughter who had just turned 4. I was slightly older than Jim and Matt. I was in my, what then seemed so old. I was 27. Oh my goodness. I was like, oh, I'm the mother to the world because I'm older than everyone else. And now I'm like, I was so young. But I had just moved from Casper. I had worked, I'd gotten an English degree in Casper through UW-CC and had decided to become a teacher because I had worked with kids in a juvenile detention center, realized I was not cut out for that kind of work, but that I was really good at working on teaching them writing and literature, and thought, oh, maybe I should do this, and I need to move to Laramie to make that happen. I had met Matt only once in Casper. I think he was still in high school. And some friends of mine, I worked at a place that took care of people with developmental disabilities, and a gay couple who would throw dinner parties. They called them family dinners, and they would invite every ally and everybody who was part of an alternative lifestyle or anybody that they just liked, and they had a really safe, big potluck dinners, and this gaggle of high school kids came in once, and the only reason Matt stood out of the 3 or 4 kids, and there were some other kids who were young, college age, and I was motherly even then, and I was in my earlier 20s, and I was like, don't let them drink, they're underage, guys, come on now. And, but I just remembered we were the same height, and I was hanging out with another friend of mine who was also a more diminutive male, and we realized we had the same size hands. So that's the only reason Matt stayed in my memory, is I was like, I met 2 guys who were as short as me, and they're lovely young kids. Yay. But in October, I was adjusting to being a student, and I realized that I wanted to join things that I hadn't done because I had dropped in and out of college and in and out of college, and now I was taking it pretty seriously for my kid and wanting to give her a better personal future within our family. And I had joined like Amnesty International, where I'd met Father Roger. Didn't realize that's who I'd met because I was new and it was a blur of new people. I'd met Cathy Connolly because she was one of the women's studies professors, and my favorite professor. Later I would realize and learn as I took her classes. And I was getting a women's studies degree as well as an English degree, so I joined the Women's Studies Coalition. And then I was walking by this table, and there was all these signs about, you know, the LGBTA, which is now Spectrum. And I was like, I want to join that too. They meet on Tuesday nights, and my then husband, now ex-husband, could take care of my little girl, and I could go to those meetings, and I was so excited. And it was literally 2 days later that I found out about Matt, and I was like, I think I've met him. And that solidified for me to get more involved and more involved and more involved. Before I knew it, it became a mission to make the world better for my daughter and not just my own financial plan, and to not just think activism was showing up at a MLK rally once a year and thinking that I'm all that in progressivism because I went to one march a year. I didn't know it would become who I am, but I think it kind of did. Matthew's legacy lives on in how I teach and how I over-volunteer. And that 4-year-old is a 24-year-old grad student now at NYU, and many of you heard her on Wyoming Public Radio before she moved, the lovely on-air personality of Alana Elder. But she got to be 24, and that's been what's hitting me so much lately, is she got to be past 21. And if she could have met Matt, she would have, you know, if he was in his 40s and was like, hello, I've done these great things with my poli-sci degree and all of this stuff, that would have been lovely. And so I was quiet and in the background and didn't realize until the time progressed what a big change this made in my life, and how I just want to be able to make a never again where no other family has to go through what Dennis and Judy went through. I look at my own children and think, I don't know how I would ever get out of bed for a minute if anything so horrific happened, and yet they fight and fight and fight to make the world better for everyone who's been oppressed, especially in the LGBTIQ community, but everyone. And we need more Judy and Dennises, and we all have to be Judy and Dennises because of that.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, because two things. I am an outsider, and I never met Matthew Shepard. It's interesting because in the past 20 years, I think some people think because of the work that I've done that I have, but I've been blessed to get to know so many of the people that loved him, his parents, his friends, other students, activists, and I vividly remember that day. I was in Washington, D.C., and I was attending a press conference that morning for a group called the Family Research Council. They have very little to do with any of those words, but they're a virulently anti-LGBT group, and they were debuting a new set of ads that were going to tout what most people would call pray away the gay, or reparative therapy, telling people who were LGBTQ that they could be straight. And I came back, I mean, it was very jarring. It's always hard to sit in those kinds of rooms with those folks who are talking about me and the people in my community and people I care about as if there's not only something wrong with us, but that we just shouldn't exist. And I came back to the office in Washington, the GLAAD office, and GLAAD was still pretty small back then. It was 1998. We had just got our first kind of big bump because Ellen came out in 1997 as a historical marker there, and so people were feeling more positive and things. So it was really hard to come back from that. We were talking about how are we going to deal with this? How do we educate the media? Trying to pull together experts about comparative this kind of therapies and pray away the gay stuff, and I came back to the office to this kind of relatively new thing called email. And we were starting to get emails from people all over the country because there was a wire story that went out about a young man who was found severely beaten, tied to a fence, and left to die. And they suspected that the motivation was that it was because he was gay. Now, I've been doing this work since 1989. I have dealt with, I can't tell you how many hate crimes, and that's not even what I specifically focus on. If you talk to the folks at the Anti-Violence Project, that's all they do every day. And so, I have spent the last 20 years trying to have the experiences that I had in Laramie inform the work that I do every day for everybody in our community who's victimized. And for that reason, having role models like Judy and Dennis who continue to speak out because they do have that platform that other families may not, that there are marginalized parts of our community, particularly trans women of color, who are victimized at extraordinarily high, horrific rates that the media just doesn't pay that much attention to. That this work is so important, that we continue to tell Matt's story and we continue to try and educate the media. Every time I came to Laramie, it was to do a few things. It was to work with the community and the students and get Jim out from under his desk. Little media training, and then he came out from under his desk. And he was incredible, as of all of Matt's friends and all the local activists. It's really scary to do that kind of stuff. Not because it's a particularly difficult thing to do. I do interviews all the time, but because everyone involved felt a tremendous amount of responsibility to Matt, to the community, Because honestly, I grew up in New York. I didn't know where Laramie was. And then we were flying in, which I will never do again. I always drive from Denver now because I don't do well on small planes. And I was sitting next to someone from the Newman Center, and the first place I went was that vigil. And I looked at the window, and I was like, that looks like the surface of the moon. Like that, where are we going, you know? and I thought to myself the same thing, I think, often when dealing with these issues. Why do I go to such beautiful places for such horrible reasons? And why do I get to interact with and get to know and love people under the worst circumstances? I mean, people who become like family, like chosen family. And I think that, you know, trying to help the students deal with the media, which was completely overwhelming. I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, and I had to put up the strong front because I was old. I was like 32 or something, you know. I was the old lady. And then the other was really trying to hold the media accountable. Because I was just as pissed as anybody who lives here, that they tried to sensationalize the story, it's the wild, wild west, like all that crap. And I was standing there saying, this happens in Manhattan. Like you cannot stereotype this town because this happens in every town. Which is why I feel like the Laramie Project and Judy and Dennis's work are the two most impactful things that have come out of Matt's death so far, because it tells the story of every town, and it could be any town. And then trying to really just debunk the gay panic defense, the lack of understanding about hate crimes, and you know some of the stuff that Dave was talking about. That people wanted to try and spin the story a different way because they were homophobic, had internalized homophobia for other reasons. But I have worked on so many things in the course of my career as an activist, and I can say without question that the small contributions that I've been able to make working directly around Matt's death and all that happened after for the past 20 years has changed my life. And I think we all of us in the community, the thousands of people who came up to me and said, you know, in 1998, when Matthew Shepard was killed, I came out to my parents. I got involved in the community. I mean, Judy and Dennis can tell you a million stories of people who, you know, have talked to them about how their lives changed in that way. And so on a very personal level, and as a parent, it really changed me when I became a parent to appreciate and understand and be so grateful for the work that his parents are doing. And that we continue to do this, and we continue to gather and tell the story and talk to each other in dialogue, because no matter how bad things may be politically right now, I think we will get through it, we'll get past it, and we will continue to move forward and make progress. Thanks.
Thank you. It's amazing how quickly time vanishes. We've used half of the hour already. Really would like to give the opportunity for our community to be involved. The title for this panel was Mourning, Remembering. One of the challenges I feel as a pastor with college students coming into the Newman Center is that many of them have not heard of Matthew Shepard. They don't remember the way we remember. And so I feel a certain obligation to continue to bring that memory forward and to bring this community into conversation. So would like to open it up for questions from the community. And if you wouldn't mind, if you could think if there's one of the panel members that you'd like to address that question, that might help us to move to get as many people involved as possible. So is there anyone that we would? Please.
Hi, I'm Jana Rennick. I just want to thank you guys for opening up and sharing your story. I think it's really hard. I was about 27, 28 when Matthew Shepard passed on, and I couldn't believe that, you know, how Wyoming treated your family and treated all the people that were a part of it. I was really ashamed as a Christian. And when the church is talking about sin and focusing on gay people and just being sin, I'm looking at gossip and all the other sins that we struggle with. And I was thinking about how horrible the church represents Christ when you're talking about God's image. and how we condemn each other in our sin because we're all human. And so I'm not here to discuss his sin. I'm here to say that I'm really sorry, as a person who's human and has sin too, that we would condemn your brother or condemn your friend or whoever that might be. Because I think that Christ, I believe that he loves everyone. So if, for me as a person who has to say I'm dyslexic when I take a test, and I get discrimination from people who are A students who might be gay or black or different, whoever they might be, I think that acceptance is around the circle. And I think that acceptance is not discriminating against one person also because they're not gay or because they have a disability or whatever that might be, to accept others as they are. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much. Question in the back, Milton.
Yes, I'd like to hear from Jim and Nicole about the angels and how that came about, and the idea behind it, and especially when we marched down the sidewalk, coming, especially to the Union, where Fred Phelps and his followers were, and when you stood in front of them, what was their reaction?
It was the best thing ever.
Totally.
Romaine Patterson and I were talking on the phone. We had just gotten the press release via fax machine. If you don't know what a fax machine is, see me after and I'll tell you about tales of technology of yesteryear. We had just gotten the very colorful fax from Fred Phelps and the Westboro Baptist Church indicating that they were going to be here for the trials. Now, Phelps had been to campus before. I had seen and heard his rhetoric before. We had seen and heard what had happened at the funeral. And so Romaine and I were talking on the phone, and I said, yeah, we were talking about it the other day, and we had this idea of big-ass angel wings that would block out the signs and the messages of hate. She said, oh, that's really cool. Somebody should really do that. Okay, I have to go. I got to go to work at the coffee shop. And she called me back about 2-3 hours later and said, who do we need to talk to about permits and how many angels can you get? We are going to do this. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay. I got to call Dave O'Malley because he'll know about permits. And I know I can come up with a couple of angels. And we got ready. What had happened was Romaine had been at the coffee shop and got to talking with one of her friends who grabbed a napkin and sketched out a design for the framework for the angel wings. And when she got off shift, she came and said, we're going to do this. Like any good lesbian, she ran to the hardware store and bought PVC pipe and sent the gay boys to get linens. And it was bed sheets and PVC pipe and decorator garland like you decorate for a party or your Christmas tree. And that was it. That was all it took. And we wanted to make sure that Phelps's messages of hate was not what our family and friends had to see on the nightly news, or at least not the only thing. We wanted to do something that would combat his messages of hate and let folks know that that's not the way we think here in Laramie, and we're not okay with that kind of hate. And we wanted to be very careful about doing it in a way that didn't sink to his level, so that we didn't end up in shouting matches and name calling, and angels seem to be something, a symbol of peace and love. Something that most folks don't know is that in addition to that, we also, about 150 yards away at the Union, we had Parties Not Prejudice, where a friend of ours who was in the United Multicultural Club, and Dominic Martinez, for those of you who know him, who doubled as a DJ, was blasting Madonna and Cher and ABBA and every other gay anthem he could think of, while people danced. And we had a little potluck out there with cookies and punch and soda, donated by the Methodist Church and student organizations who came together so that there was a positive event going on for folks who didn't want to be near the toxicity of Uncle Freddie, as we called him. And when we also, when he left, we grabbed a bucket and some scrub brushes and soapy water and symbolically washed the hate right off of our campus. And because stereotypes come from somewhere, joyfully singing a corrupted show tune, I'm going to wash that hate right off of my campus, instead of I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair from South Pacific. I remember that when we walked up, it was cold. That first protest was cold like this morning. We were holding coffee. Nobody was drinking it. We just wanted to hold it. So we, just like Halloween costumes in Wyoming, we had to do angel costumes that you could wear coats underneath.
Romaine had her leather jacket on underneath hers, and I remember being so worried because it had to have tape on it. I was like, that's a really nice jacket. I don't want it to get tape stuck on it forever. And I thought, what a great sacrifice that she's putting tape on her cool leather jacket.
And when we walked up, turning and dodging under street signs, because those wings had some reach, when we got close to the courthouse, for just a minute, Phelps and his group, in the middle of shouting venom and vitriol, shut the hell up. Which is not something that happens often. And so just walking up, we knew, gotcha. Yep. That we had done exactly what we set out to do. And as I said Thursday night in the Angels production, love silenced hate in Laramie.
Yep. I just want to add something real quick. First, some things don't change after 20 years, and some stereotypes do hold. But I didn't know about the Angels. It was like they wouldn't even tell me. And when they came around the corner to the courthouse, and Phelps did, I think the phrase is stunned silence. Is that what you were looking for? It was really extraordinary. I started to cry. The media, this was, of course, my favorite moment. The media were at Phelps, and then they went like that. It was like, okay, job accomplished. But here's the thing. Romaine and Jim and all of the folks who participated don't realize they didn't just deal with it here in Laramie. Creating the Angel Action changed the way our community responded to Fred Phelps. I've been dealing with Fred Phelps and seen Fred Phelps forever. People would yell at him. San Francisco, he would protest the funerals of people who died of AIDS, and people threw eggs at him, like just not good, not good. After that moment, it completely changed. Ever since then, we've seen totally different responses, not just to Phelps, but to anybody like Phelps. So instead of seeing everybody starting to chant, some people will do the shame thing as they walk by on in a Pride March or Pride Parade, but I have gotten, and I'm sure you've gotten 10 million times more calls. How do we respond in a good way? How to gather different clergy? They do the surround and drown by singing Amazing Grace. They want the schematics so they can make PVC angel wings, which were like 6 feet wingspan, 8 feet. They were huge, or big ass, as Romaine would say. They were big ass wings. But I think it's really important to understand that it created a shift within our community, and it was a response, as I said, was saying to the reporters, because I said I didn't know they were going to do this. They were responding with grace, and they were responding with love, and it really did turn around so many people who may not have been our allies, but who looked at that and then looked at Phelps and had to decide where they stood. And that's where we all know where they decided to go stand.
I remember that before we marched, we were standing in a circle in an alley, and Romaine walked and held each of our hands and was, think your happy thought, and gave us earplugs. And Jim and I were talking about, did any of us use the earplugs? And I don't think any of us did. When we were circled around Phelps, he would come up and he would say these horrible comments directly to each one of us, and you could feel his breath on the back of your neck. I had way shorter hair back then. And I remember thinking, this is awful what you're saying, but it's not hurting me because I'm feeling the love of the people that are around me. And I know that what we're doing is because of love and because of kindness and compassion and goodness. And so we didn't use our earplugs because we had something stronger holding us together, and that we had those happy thoughts.
Some of the things that I also that meant the most were some of the cops who were providing security and walking in between us as a barrier, whispering to us, good job, thank you for being here, under their breath, because, that was unprofessional and they shouldn't say things like that. They're not taking any sides in this, and still letting us know, thank you. Hearing from people that I had done, that had worked at the junior high when I did my student teaching, who were then working in the courthouse and who looked out of the windows that day and saw us, and telling me what that meant to them. And there's a moment in the Laramie Inside Out documentary by Bev Seckinger, a UW alum, who actually put on her own wings with us for a while, the second go-round. But when she was here the first time, Phelps stared straight into her camera and said some horrific things that shook her. And later that day when we were down here at the Union, one of the angels from Denver, Roland, she's got him on camera where he says to her, I heard what he said to you, and I'm sorry he said those things. But I was right here with you, taking them on. And to me, that is probably the best explanation of what we were trying to do, and what we wanted our response to be, was to take that on.
Thank you.
And Sarah's going to burst.
I saw that.
Something happening to the Hilton, which I think is obscene and a desecration to the memory of Matthew. But in the spirit of Jim and Nicole and Cathy and Romaine and all the folks, we have an alternative event at the Civic Center, and it's the dance. It's called When They Go Low, We Go Dance. It's an opportunity to come and celebrate with the beloved queer community, have some snacks, dance your pants off, and invest your energy in that. So I hope everybody here will come Tuesday at 6:30 to the Civic Center. And my question for the three of you.
Much better use of your time, yes.
And then you're part of the community and the history that does the thing that Laramie does. Just like they did 20 years ago, you have that opportunity to invest your energy into something positive and creative. I think all three of you met with Megan Phelps Roper when she came this summer, and I was just wondering if you could talk to us about that.
So many of you know that a family member of Fred Phelps visited the University of Wyoming and gave a powerful witness and testimony to her own journey of a conversion of heart and to living her life now. And the three had an opportunity to visit with Megan, and if you could just reflect on your experience.
So I take students to the Shepard Symposium for Social Justice every year. I've gone to that since I was an undergraduate, and it was called the Symposium for the Eradication of Inequality, so I'm a longtime participant in that. And we got there a little early because that was what worked with the bus schedule. And I can't even remember which wonderful person organized it, but said, we're doing a round table with Megan Phelps Roper, if you and your students would like to sit in and be part of it. So it was her and about 20, 25 people, and 15 of those or 12 of those or whatever were high school kids. And what was so profound to me is, again, I decided to become an angel in part because I wanted my 4-year-old and all the other kids in the world to grow up in a world of love and not a world of hate, and a world of compassion instead of cruelty. And here was this girl who had not been at that specific event. She said she had an ear infection and her family left her at home, but that her cousins and siblings had been there. And here she was now, had left that church and had been disowned by her family because of it. The first people that took her in was a rabbi's family, even though the Westboro Baptist Church doesn't keep all their vitriol just for the LGBTIQ community. They make sure to spread it around, and the Jewish community gets a lot of heat from them as well. And what happened is people would respond to her tweets and her Facebook messages and other social media, not with the angry, spiteful words, but with, well, here is debunking what you just said with the Bible or with this scientific fact. And she started becoming friends with these people, and then she grew in her compassion, and then she left. And now here she was in this circle meeting with members of a couple of my classes and my Sally Club, kids who felt comfortable to sometimes come out as part of the LGBTIQ community as young as 12 and 13 years old in Laramie, Wyoming. And she's giving them support, and she is saying, I'm there with you. And it was just really powerful and beautiful to see that love really did reach out and end hate for this young woman, love and logic, mind you, and that she's still a Christian. She still practices praying, but now she prays for compassion for everyone, and for growing in acceptance for everyone, and for teaching people to not hate. And I think that she is proof when things feel really yucky and awful in politics and stuff right now, that we may have taken, the pendulum may have shifted backwards slightly, but we definitely stepped forward 3 or 4 steps before that happened. And I just wanted to speak out as a teacher who got to have my students see this woman change so that they too can meet hate with love and hopefully change some other people's minds.
I got to do something I never thought I'd do. I got to hug a Phelps. And I liked it. After hearing her speak and hearing her message echo what I've been saying, what Nikki's been saying, what all of us have been saying for more than 20 years, that I just, as those of you who know me, I couldn't keep my mouth shut, and I had to stand up and make a comment, and told her that I was one of the angels, and that I had counter-protested her family multiple times with peaceful, positive presences, with Parties Not Prejudice, with a hate-a-thon for every minute that Phelps was here. People donated money so that the longer he stayed, the more we raised. And it was an incredible moment. And I just thanked her for sharing her own struggles, for telling her own story, because that is often the hardest thing to do. And just like Dave, I've heard him give that talk for 20 years now, and it hasn't changed in 20 years to hear him describe the way he used to be and what it means that I have gone to Rendezvous with Dave and Jennifer O'Malley. If you don't know, that's the big gay camp out in the woods that Wyoming Equality puts on. 450 of your closest friends in the woods. We won the campiest campground the year that Dave and Jennifer were with us. The cocktail blender next to the road may have had something to do with it. But I told Megan Phelps Roper, thank you for being vulnerable and for being brave within yourself to challenge your own ideas and beliefs and to examine those, and for coming and sharing that with us, because that takes some real guts. And she started to cry and came down to give me a hug. Another one of those experiences that I never would have had if I had not taken that first step to say, as Romaine put it, we are going to do this. I can't emphasize enough, every one of you in this room has that power and ability to change the world around you. You don't have to set out to become, to create a national symbol. Just go to your local hardware store and Bed Bath & Beyond, or whatever you are passionate about, get involved. Don't leave it to somebody else. I've been reminiscing a lot this month and this week, and it terrifies me that speeches that I gave 20 years ago still apply, or more accurately, apply again. And that things that we talked about then, the messages, the original angel press release, talked about the angels being the symbol of peace that so many people are searching for in our country today. It's 20 years later, and we are still searching for that same peace because of the same sort of division and hate. Get off your butts, get involved, and as Dennis reminds people every single time he speaks, vote.
Please vote.
Just a quick question. You talked about how we're still waiting for peace, and Dave had said that, alluded to the fact that we'll probably always be waiting for it. But as people who have been on the front lines working with communities and individuals, I'm wondering if you could make any general comments on the differences that you're seeing in conversations that you were having with, say, 18 or 20-year-olds or 15-year-olds 20 years ago versus today.
Want me to take that first?
Sure.
Okay. We'll go by age. So it's interesting. It's a little bit of it's a good, and I'm hopeful, and yet I also see things that are very concerning to me. So, like the current generation, my daughter's 13. Teenagers, adolescents nowadays, for them, things are complicated and yet not complicated at all. So kids are out and are coming out, as Nikki said, 12, 13. The toothpaste is out of the tube, as I'm fond of saying, in terms of, obviously the LGBTQ community is large, part of everyone's families and communities, and, the old "we're here, we're queer, we're not going anywhere" is very true. However, the political climate in the last 2 years, after all the progress we made, deeply, deeply concerns me. And the best indicator, unfortunately, of that is that in the last 2 years, hate crimes have spiked tremendously, not just against LGBTQ people, people of different religions, people of color, but the reality is that we live in a climate that feels like worse than 20 years ago, where there's somebody in the White House who's kind of giving permission to folks to say, and as Dave said accurately, words can become actions, to go after all kinds of marginalized groups. I mean, I think the one thing that we can thank Trump for is that he has brought a lot of different people together. I don't think it was necessarily the way he wanted, but that's fine. I find our communities working together across community in intersectional ways. I find the LGBT community doing a more and better job. of understanding how our multiple identities, you know, I'm a lot of different things. I'm a lesbian, but I'm a lot of other things too. How those intersect and interact. So that gives me hope. And, you know, at the end of the day, we saw what happened with the Kavanaugh hearings. You know, you saw a bunch of, and no offense to any old white men in the audience, but old straight white men in the audience in that hearing, that they're going to be gone soon. And we're starting to see more women running, more young people running, more queer people running for office, and that's going to be how we create the change. The culture is never going to change. The culture is going to continue to progress, continue to be more inclusive, and as we do that, we push the politicians to make the kind of institutional changes that then will give us the protections we need. I mean, the reality is, yes, we got rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Yes, we have marriage equality. But the reality is also that in over 30 states in this country, you can be fired because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity. And that is absolutely ridiculous. That is unbelievable. And the vast majority of people in this country support job protections for the LGBT community. So why aren't we passing that legislation? So maybe after November, we can start to see some change.
And Laramie has a non-discrimination ordinance, but Wyoming is one of those states that doesn't.
That's right.
I work with youth. I've worked with youth for over 20 years now. I've been a high school teacher for 19 years. I've been at Laramie High School for 17. I never before lived in one place more than 3 or 4 years from birth, so this is pretty profound. I've gotten to watch the changes happen from, you know, I think that because I've always taught millennials and now post-millennials, I've always seen a more accepting group of kids. They've always been a really aware and accepting of diversity and difference and the champion to the underdog. First of all, I think that's part of adolescence anyway, but I think that they're carrying that into adulthood, and that every few years it gets a little stronger. At Laramie High now, our Sally Club is doing really well, but a lot of kids come, like one of them talked to Jim, but several kids said, I haven't joined the club because I feel supported everywhere I turn in my school. And Jim said next time I should say, well, come support the kids who need you then. And I wish I'd said that, those things where you can, if I could just back up 5 minutes and redo that. But it's true. We have kids who will come out and be also, you know, the runner-up for homecoming king or homecoming queen. And we had a student who transitioned, and as part of her transition ran for student body president as a sophomore, and then as her senior year decided to run for the school board of our local community while still a high school senior, which is Rihanna Kelver. She did well. She did not win. I wish that it was a Disney movie and I could tell you that she did. But she did well. She came in close to, came close to winning. And the people who talked to me, and because they knew I was her teacher and her club sponsor and, you know, surrogate family member in some ways because I just like to mother the world, people felt like they needed to stop me in the street and say, I would have voted for, it was her age that made me not. I think otherwise the things she was saying were exactly what I believe. I just thought she needs to, you know, do this or do that. And I was like, so it's ageism instead of LGBT heterosexism. I can deal with that because you'll see her again. She's not done changing the world, as are most of the millennials and post-millennials. And then I'm a mom of not just a 24-year-old, but I also have a teenager. She's a junior. And I get to hear from her and all of her friends who are not in my clubs. They're not, I mean, they probably, a couple of them are, but they're super busy with their sports and their AP classes. But I hear them in the halls, or she tells me interactions she had. And and she never tells me names because I don't want to accidentally be prejudiced against a kid because they made their prefrontal cortex isn't completely developed and they said something not nice. But she'll tell me what her other friends' responses were and what her responses were. And the community, for the most part, even though not always, you know, you're always going to have to try to fix bullying and fix prejudice and meet hate with love. And I mean, hopefully it continues to get better and better. But she tells me that the majority of kids will stand up for that compassionate reason and not, you know, bandwagon into the negative. So that just makes me even more hopeful for the future. I think every generation gets more compassionate, and I love that I still get to be on the forefront of it.
Thank you.
I-
You have about 30 seconds.
You got it.
Sorry.
I see it in the questions I'm asked. There's a shift. I get asked real questions now, not things like, which one of you is the man in the relationship? We're both men, that's the point. I see it in a room full of people on a Saturday morning in October, 20 years later. I see it in an entire community coming together to put on a month and a half, 2 months of activities. I see it on Facebook with kids that I graduated with and teachers that were teaching in the schools when I was growing up in this state, where I grew up hearing that those people were going to burn in hell, not realizing that one of those people was sitting on the couch or in the classroom next to them. And this year, instead, I'm getting messages saying, thank you for doing what you're doing. I'm getting messages from people who used to be my teachers saying, I'm now a principal of a school. Did you see this awesome article in the magazine Teaching Tolerance? I make my whole staff read it. I see it in the youth and in the fact that we had not only the collegiate chorale, but the high school choir and the junior high, or the middle school choir participate in an event that dealt with Matt's murder, and high school students who read their poetry, and a room full of people. And I've seen standing ovations more times this week than I thought I'd ever see. And that's the change. It's the change in the hearts and the minds in our living rooms and our classrooms and our places of worship. And you're all a part of that, and now your homework is to go home and turn it up to 11.
Yes. By the way,
30 seconds over.
the Laramie project is being worked through, and it's going to be performed at State Drama by the Drama 2 class at Laramie High School. This is the first time the Laramie project has been done at Laramie High. They may even work later. They're hoping to work on the whole play for a competition in Nebraska in the summer. And I cannot be more proud of my colleagues that are making this happen.
Thank you again for this wonderful time. One last personal comment. This wonderful booklet was put together for me during my time in Laramie leading up to coming back to serve as a priest. It literally is a page in my life. This page in this book is one that I am most proud of. In 1998, when I was able to be here as the executive assistant for external relations, seeing the movement between October 6th and October 10th in my own life, from going to telling the jokes to being the one who needed to say the right thing out of love. And I'd ask you to stand together. Nikki, if you'd hold up that armband, please. Please stand. This is what was spoken at the night of homecoming sing. I'm sure that most of you know the tragedy that has occurred in our community. It has shaken the lives of so many people. Today, I would encourage us to recognize this tragedy. One way to do so is to wear the yellow armbands that many of the administration, faculty, staff, and students have been wearing. The green circle is the international sign of peace. The yellow background is a symbol and tradition of the yellow ribbon distributed in response to the Oklahoma City bombing. Speaking of intolerance we have toward violence. Please display this ribbon anywhere and everywhere as an armband on your backpack, as a display of your intolerance of the disgusting, abhorrent act of incivility toward Matthew Shepard. We wear this armband in a unified, nonviolent demonstration of our values as UW students and the UW community against any and all acts of violence and disrespect toward any other human being. These armbands will be available in the breezeway. The second way to recognize this tragedy would be to individually observe a moment of silence as we all stand in solidarity against prejudice and violence in all of its forms, and especially for the family of Matthew Shepard and all who are involved in this incident, that they may find comfort, hope, and the spirit of forgiveness and love. Dennis, thank you for being with us this morning. We stand with you and your family every day.